Okay, so we've just saved our banner advert, and the next thing we need to think of is actually creating our graphics before we actually want to use them on the stage, and that's quite an important step in your Flash design process. Just like if you were going to actually produce a play in a theatre or film a movie, you'd first of all cast your group of actors rather than just getting a load of people off the street and hoping that they could perform the play to your satisfaction. So we're going to come over to the library panel over here on the right hand side, behind the properties panel, notice there. I'm going to come right down to the bottom to the new symbol button just down here. So right down the bottom there, new symbol, first icon. Click on that once and it's going to bring us up a little dialog box. Currently this is in the advanced mode. I don't think I need that much detail yet. Let's go back to basics. Okay, there's two things that we need to set when we create a new symbol. The first one is its name. Now, I've got a list of different ideas of what we're going to create in this view, and we're going to start off with a load of text items that are going to be used within our movie. And the first one is simply going to be the word advertisement. And a lot of advertising companies suggest that you just put this as either a sub-note or at the top of your banner advert, just hidden slightly out of the way, so that any user browsing a page will know that that's an advert rather than part of the page content. Just below that, we're also going to change the type, and we're going to use a movie clip. Now, you have the choice really between using movie clips or graphic symbols, but one key advantage that movie clips do give you is the ability to apply filters to them. So you can apply blurs, drop shadows, beveled edges, and so on. And also, as we get to more advanced topics, we can write action script behind these movie clips. So I'm going to click on OK. Now that takes us away from the stage into our own design area for this advertisement text. So come over to the text tool over here at the side. Now, before you type in any text, always revisit the Properties tab. The first thing to check is that you're using static text rather than the other options, dynamic or input. This text is always going to be the word advertisement, therefore we don't need it to change dynamically in any way. A couple of other settings that are worth thinking about here at this stage. The most important, colour. So often I end up with colour set to white here. I come in, type my text, and I simply can't read it on the stage area here. So make sure it's a colour that's going to contrast well enough. Black's a good start. We can always change this in the future. Point size, yeah, we don't really know. As we're away from the stage, I'm not really sure how big it should be. So we'll get it in and then we'll change the size to roughly what we expect it to be. And the only other thing really to think about at this stage is the actual font that you want to use. Now, I'm going to actually create a banner advert for Academy class, so I'm going to use our corporate font, which is DIN Medium. So find that here. There it is, DIN Medium. Okay. Let's leave it at that for a minute. Let's create the text, then we'll come back to the settings. So we're going to click in here, type in advertisement. Actually, I think I'm going to have that in capitals. There we go. Then simply come back to your black mouse pointer, your selection tool, click once, and it will bring that back. So there we go, there's our advertisement text. So what else can we set? What other properties are there available to us? Well, the most important really is its position, its X and Y position. Now, although we can change these simply by moving the item around, it's very difficult often to get the item exactly where you want it, and I want it to be on that cross, which is, you can see it's quite hard work. But simply by changing the X and Y to 0 and 0, it will position the top left corner of your text box right on that registration point. Now we've got the text in there, I can see that yes, it's probably a little bit on the large side for where I want to position it, just hidden at the top corner of my banner advert, so I'm going to drop that size down. Now what's great about Flash is that it's a vector drawing package, therefore if this size ends up being a little bit too small when you use the library item, you can simply resize that instance of this advertisement movie clip up or down so that it suits the situation you've used it in. The other little option that's probably worth thinking about here is the anti-aliasing method. Now, this text isn't actually going to animate. It's going to sit just in the top corner of our banner advert and stay stationary. So I'm going to use anti-alias for readability, which should make my text appear crisper and sort of more clear to the user, allowing them to read it. Whereas the other text that we're going to use, that's going to be moving, we may well anti-alias for animation instead. The little thing to watch out for is this little selectable option here. With that turned on, the user will actually be able to interact with this text, select it and copy and paste it. Chances are in a banner advert you want to turn that off, so the user doesn't ever get the cursor symbol when they're interacting with the movie. They're always going to get that sort of pointy finger hand. Okay, so there we go. There's our advertisement element set up. We then simply come back up to the top left and return to scene 1. Okay, now we'll do the others with a little bit more of a turn of speed. So we'll come back over to the library. Let's create ourselves another new symbol. Okay, and I'm going to create one called First Class Training. Now notice in the name there, I'm not putting in any spaces. If I choose to extend this with ActionScript in the future, that will stand me in really good stead. Also notice the capitalization. Really all movie clips want to have a capital letter at the beginning, but because we're not using spaces, we need a nice, clear and easy way of seeing the separate words. This capitalization, or camel case as it's called in the trade, is really, really useful. So we'll click on OK, take our text T. It should remember all the settings, but let's just quickly check. Yes, there they all are. Click in the box. First class training. Change the X and Y to 0 and 0. I think I want that one to be a little bit larger, but I'm not sure, so I'm just going to go a tiny bit up. That should probably do quite nicely. And this is going to move, so I'm going to choose anti-alias for animation. Notice that visually there's not a huge difference, but because Flash is going to smooth it less, it should get that done more quickly, and therefore it should be able to keep up with our 24 frames per second animation rate. Okay, let's come back to scene 1. Okay, back over to the library. Back to new again. Now our slogan is First Class Training for Creatives and Developers. So I'm going to create one called For Creatives. Text tool. Back to the black mouse pointer, back to properties, X and Y of 0 and 0. Like that, nice and simple. Anti-alias for animation has been remembered. Back to scene 1, back to the library, new symbol, and developers. Click OK, text tool, and developers. Back to properties, black mouse pointer, X and Y to 0 and 0. Back to C1. Fantastic. Now, this summer, Academy Class have moved offices in London to Waterloo. So we're going to actually add in, let's just change that name there. Actually, easy way to do that. And developers. Okay, so we're going to then have an Academy Class element. Academy Class. Again, change the X and Y to 0 and 0. Back to scene 1. And then the final item we're going to have is going to say we're now at Waterloo. So now at Waterloo. Notice I'm being really descriptive in the names of my symbols here. The idea here is just to help me out later on. You can see already I've got half a dozen symbols created in my library panel now. Later I may have 20, 30, 40, 50 symbols. I need to be able to quickly tell which one I want to use in this instance. So let's click on OK. Text tool. Now, capital thing. Now at Waterloo. Again, black mouse pointer to select it. Properties, 0 and 0. And it just moves into position nicely. We'll come back into scene 1, and then reviewing our library, I've got my advertisement text, my first class training for creatives and developers, Academy Class, now at Waterloo. So that's my series of textual elements that I want to go in the movie. Thing is, text is boring, it doesn't really excite the users. So how about a bit of colour? I want to have a background that sits behind my movie, so I'm going to create another new symbol. I'm going to call it background. There we go. Now, background's going to simply be a rectangle, so I'm going to choose my rectangle tool. I'm going to go into properties. I'm going to have a quick look at the settings. Fill and stroke. Well, I don't want it to have a line around the outside. It's simply going to be a background fill. So, yep, it's got a colour. Black's not perfect. It's not really what I want, but it will do. And that's the most important thing with drawing in Flash. You can always change settings later. So let's draw ourselves a rectangle. So, rectangle's drawn, back to the black mouse pointer, and then I'll select that rectangle. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the X and Y position, so it's at 0 and 0. Notice I'm pretty much always going to do this. I'm going to position the top left corner of whatever shape or piece of text or image that we add so that it's on that registration point. Then we come to the next settings, the width and the height. Well, I could set these to 250 by 250 to match my movie. So let's do that, 250 by 250. Great. Now I need to think a bit about my fill, because I don't want a black background behind everything. It's going to be very difficult to read my black text that I've just produced. So I'm going to try and use some corporate colours, but this doesn't really give me the option to change that. It gives me a few changes, but not really what I want. So I'm going to bring up an extra window. In the window menu at the top of the screen, we have the colour panel. Now, colour will probably pop up kind of in the way a little bit, so let's just move it to one side while we perform this step. I'm going to use a linear gradient instead. Okay. There we go, there's a linear gradient. And here we get this sort of washing line approach with two ends. Simply double click on one end and it brings up the colour palette. I'm going to choose this colour here. I'm going to double click on the other end. I'm going to choose the same colour, which might seem a bit strange to you. Now that, of course, doesn't give me a gradient. But once I've got it in, I can use this brightness control to darken that end. And it's a really nice way of just using the same, effectively, the same colour, the same hue, but changing the brightness. Okay, so then I can get rid of the colour panel, happy with that. I'm just going to click away. Notice the hashing on the shape makes it difficult to see exactly how that's going to look. So click away once and it'll give you a preview. Not a bad set of colours. But my gradient is flowing in the wrong direction. So I want to transform that gradient and rotate it through 90 degrees. Now one way we could do that, given we have a square, is simply to rotate our shape using the free transform tool. But behind the free transform tool, we'll find the gradient transform tool. Okay, simply click on your shape, and rather than rotating the shape, this simply rotates the gradient inside it. So we'll go to the top corner up here, and spin that round. It rotates the gradient. We can also shrink the gradient so it's over a smaller area, or indeed stretch it so it's wider than the scope of the box. Excellent. So there we go, there's our nice little gradient in view there. Okay, next we're going to come back to scene 1 because that's my background complete. Then, the final thing, back to the library. I need to create myself a border because your banner advert wants something to effectively demarcate where the edge of your advert is and where the rest of the website begins. So our final item, border. Okay, now this is going to be almost exactly the same idea as our background. It's going to be a rectangle. But in the properties window, this time I don't want to have a fill, but I do want to have a stroke. Draw yourself a rectangle. Now to select the rectangle when it hasn't got a fill, you can't click in the middle. There's nothing there. So you have to double click on the edge. You'll notice when I clicked once, it selected that side, and then when I clicked again, it selects the whole of the rectangle. So the X and Y are going to be 0 and 0. Great. And then the width and height. And this is the sneaky trick. The width and height of any shape, particularly rectangles, sets the shape's fill size. If I set this to 250 by 250, we actually lose that right hand and bottom edge of our stroke off the actual movie because they'll appear to the right and to the bottom of the stage. What we actually want to do is set this to 249 by 249, 1 pixel shy of the edge, which will bring it across, and then you have your 1 pixel stroke over on the right or down the bottom. And then we'll come back to see more. Okay, so that's all of our simple elements created here in Flash, and you notice we've already got 8 items in our library. Well, the next thing I want to do is I want to bring in a JPEG image, a bit of graphics that I've drawn somewhere else. So let's go to File, Import, and we're going to import into the library because that's where we want to create all of our actors. Okay, so here's some library items. Let's drop this box down. Okay, I want to go into my Documents folder. And I need to find the image that I need, so where is it? Slash outlines. And there it is, bird.jpg, which is our Academy class bird logo. So I'm going to import that into the library, and you can see there it is, over at the side. But at the moment, that is just a JPEG image. I actually want to create a symbol so that I can animate it, fade in, fade out, add filters and effects to it, and so on. So we're going to create ourselves a new symbol called bird with a capital B, hit on OK, and simply drag and drop bird.jpg in as if it were a shape. Now that's an interesting one. See those? Funny size. So first of all, I'm going to set the X and Y to 0 and 0. Now looking at that, I can see that's going to be a real pain in the backside to try and get positioned correctly in my movie. I'm going to drag it in and it's going to be quite awkward. Changing the size of it is going to be quite tricky and so on. So I'm thinking, well, what can I do to that to make it easier? Well, perhaps if I was to position the bird so it was visually centered on that region, the fact that I've got this wide area to the side shouldn't really make any difference. Notice I've just done that by eye, and that's probably the best way to position stuff when you're going for a visual effect. And we'll come back to see more. Great. And it's as easy as that. Okay, so we've created text, we've created graphical elements, and now we've imported a JPEG image. But in your Flash movies, you want to be able to work with other designers as part of a team. And perhaps you might find that there are certain graphic assets that you want to use and reuse in project after project after project. Now you can do that simply by creating a core Flash document called something like library or assets.fla and simply creating all of the graphics that you want to use and reuse in that file. We can then open up that external library document and bring stuff in from it. Okay, so I've created one called prepped library here, which has got a number of symbols in it. And you see how it opens? It opens its own little library window. At the bottom, there's one called Waterloo. So I'm going to go into library, and I'm going to pick up Waterloo, and I'm going to drag it from my prepped library into the library of this current document. And it's that easy to do. You can see now that prepped asset has been imported into my currently open project. We'll close the prepped library document because we don't need that anymore, and we'll save our banner advert.fla.